After lying there for a period of time, was rushed to Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles and he underwent emergency surgery. So Senator Kennedy was rushed to Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles, where he immediately underwent emergency surgery for his gunshot wounds. Again, 2 in the back, 1 behind his right ear.
Can you say that again?
Good Samaritan. So Senator Kennedy was rushed to Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles and immediately underwent emergency surgery. Now he was shot shortly after his speech at 12:15 a.m. on the 5th, right? 5 o'clock that evening, June 5th, Kennedy's press secretary, Frank Mankiewicz, gave a statement as to the senator's condition.
That's at 5 p.m.?
5 p.m., yep. At 5 p.m. that late afternoon, on the 5th, Robert Kennedy's press secretary, Frank Mankiewicz, made a statement publicly on Kennedy's condition, and he described his condition as, quote, extremely critical as to life. His condition as, quote, extremely critical as to life. In other words, he's in an extreme critical condition, not sure what the story's going to be about if he survives. So at 5 p.m. on June 5th, Robert Kennedy Press Secretary Frank Mankiewicz speaks publicly on the senator's condition, stating that his condition is, quote, extremely critical as to life. Unfortunately, at this point, at 5 o'clock, when Mankiewicz gave that description, the doctors were concerned, they moved their concern from survival rather than recovery. Okay, which tells you what? He may survive, but he may not recover totally from the wound, especially the one in the head. So at this point, at 5 p.m., the doctors were much more concerned about Robert Kennedy's survival than they were his recovery, just trying to save his life. By 11 p.m. that night, it became very clear that Senator Kennedy was dying, that he would not survive, and it simply would be a matter of when that happened. By 11 p.m., the night of June 5th, it became very clear that Senator Kennedy was dying, would not survive, and it was to be a matter of when it happened. At 1:59 a.m., which would have been June 6th, 1:59 a.m., Press Secretary Mankiewicz again makes an announcement to the nation. At 1:59 a.m. on June 6th, the next day, Press Secretary Mankiewicz makes another announcement to the nation. Again, you don't have to write this down. This is what he said. Senator Robert Francis Kennedy died at 1:44 a.m. today, June 6, 1968. With Senator Kennedy at the time of his death were his wife Ethel, his sisters Mrs. Stephen Smith and Patricia Lawford, brother-in-law Stephen Smith, and Mrs. John F. Kennedy. He was 42 years old. That was his statement. And then he apologized and felt terribly because Senator Edward Kennedy was actually in there and he did not mention him. But he felt terrible about it.
What time was it?
That was at 1, he died at 1:44. So he said Senator Robert Francis Kennedy died at 1:44 a.m. today, June 6, 1968. He actually made that announcement at 1:59 a.m. After his death, Senator Kennedy's body was taken for autopsy. Was it taken out of the country or out of the state like his brother's was? No. And the difference again is because of Mrs. Kennedy before and the safety of the president. This guy's not a president. He's simply a man running for the presidency. So his body was taken for an autopsy. Once the autopsy was completed, it was loaded on an airplane that was provided by the White House and took off at 1:20 p.m. on June 6, 1968. So after his death, Senator Kennedy's body was taken for an autopsy. It was then loaded on an airplane provided by the White House, and at 1:20 p.m. the afternoon of June 6, 1968, his body was flown back to New York City because he was a senator from New York. So after his death, Senator Kennedy's body was taken for autopsy. It was then loaded on an airplane that was provided by the White House. It departed at 1:20 p.m. on June 6, 1968, and was flown back to New York City and taken to St. Patrick's Cathedral for the funeral mass, St. Patrick's Cathedral. Anybody been to St. Patrick's Cathedral? It's incredible, beautiful, isn't it? St. Matthew's, which you'll see, is very, very similar, but St. Patrick's has got more to it, okay? Okay, guess who, on June 8th, 1968, June 8th, 1968, Senator Kennedy's funeral mass was conducted at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, and guess who was chosen to give the eulogy? It will be first of many he will have to give in his family, Ted Kennedy. Now I'm going to show you this on tape, not today, but Monday. And for a family who has the creed, Kennedys don't cry, Ted Kennedy did the best he could not to show emotion, but he did have moments in which you can see a break in his voice. Okay? This is the most famous words of the eulogy. Okay? Here it is. My brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death what he was in life. He should be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, who saw suffering and tried to heal it, who saw war and tried to stop it. Those of us who loved him and who take him to his rest today pray that what he was to us and what he wished for others will someday come to pass for all the world. As he said many times in many parts of this nation, to those he touched and who sought to touch him, some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not? You ever heard that quote before? That was from Ted Kennedy's eulogy. After the funeral mass, the senator's body was transported by train from New York City to Washington, D.C., where he was buried in Arlington National Cemetery next to his brother. Kind of, and a little distance away, which you'll see. Now, I'm going to tell you, I've seen a lot of things, and I'm going to show you this on tape, but if this doesn't kind of get you right about here, that train was several hours late getting back to Arlington because of the crowds of people who lined the railroad tracks. From New York City to Washington, D.C., the railroad tracks were lined with people, Military personnel, Boy Scouts, people with signs. It was incredible. It was just incredible. And I'll show you that on tape. It was just unbelievable. And the train was several hours late because of the large crowds who lined up along the railroad tracks, all the way from New York City to Washington, D.C. Once in Washington, they had a funeral procession. He was buried in Arlington National Cemetery. He was buried at 10 p.m. on June 8th, 1968. 10 p.m. because of how late they got back. 30 yards from his brother.
What was the date?
June 8th. 10 p.m. on June 8th, 1968. 30 yards from where his brother was buried. After the burial, what did Jackie Kennedy do when her husband was assassinated? What'd she do? But after that, she had a birthday party for John Jr., remember? Went on with life. After this burial, Ethel Kennedy invited close family friends to her home for a cocktail party to help the healing process. And when you go to Arlington, you're going to look at JFK's really kind of an immaculate gravesite with the eternal flame really quite there. And you're going to look 30 yards to your left and you're going to see a lone white cross where Robert Kennedy's buried and just a simple white marker. Why? Why didn't he have something? Nope. That's what he requested in his will. If he, upon his death, he wanted a simple white cross. A lot of people go there and say, well, God, look at this one, look at this one. It's what Robert Kennedy requested. This might be the saddest thing about the whole thing. You don't have to write this down. Robert F. Kennedy left behind 10 children. His wife, Ethel, who was pregnant with the couple's 11th child. He left behind 11 children. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, Joseph Patrick Kennedy II, Robert Francis Kennedy Jr., David Anthony Kennedy, who has since died, Mary Courtney Kennedy, Michael Lamone Kennedy, who since died, Mary Carey Kennedy, Christopher George Kennedy, Matthew Maxwell Taylor Kennedy, Douglas Harriman Kennedy, and the one that was unborn at his death was Rory Elizabeth Catherine Kennedy. which ironically is who John Kennedy Jr. was flying to her wedding when he was killed in his airplane accident. Now, Senator Robert Kennedy's death would result in two significant changes in America. Okay? His death is going to result in two significant changes in America. Number one, it improved tremendously the Republican Party's chances of what? Winning the presidency in 1968. Historians believe without doubt he would have won the nomination for president and probably been elected. So the number one significant change in America that resulted in Robert Kennedy's death was a victory by the Republicans in the election of 1968. The second one, more significant, for the first time in American history, Secret Service agents began to provide protection for presidential candidates. For the first time in American history, the death of Robert Kennedy resulted in the Secret Service supplying protection for presidential candidates. The shooter, going back to the assassination, the shooter and murderer and assassin of Robert Kennedy was identified as a 24-year-old Palestinian by the name of Sirhan Sirhan. So the shooter was identified as a 24-year-old Palestinian by the name of Sirhan Sirhan. Okay, here's what we've got on tap. We will talk about Sirhan's motivations on Monday. We'll give you a profile on Bobby Kennedy on Monday. You will have a test on Wednesday, not Tuesday. I want to show you this assassination video of Robert Kennedy Tuesday. After we finish the notes on Monday, because it's not very much, I will give you a review. Tuesday we'll watch the assassination of Robert Kennedy video, Wednesday the test. We will have an assassination video tomorrow on Martin Luther King Jr. It's Friday, not Thursday. We'll be here Thursday. Okay, any questions at all? All right, so next week again, tomorrow, video on Martin Luther King Jr.